Today, two things you need to watch, both of them deeply connected to Canada. One of them is out of Quebec, is genuinely one of the best shows I've ever seen. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, there is a new Netflix documentary about Rob Ford's years as mayor of Toronto. It felt honestly a bit disorienting to spend time in that era. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Teri Hart is here. David Ryder is here. Hello to both of you. How's it going?
Good.
Hello.
It's a delight to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on. Listen, I'm not sure there's ever been a mayor of a Canadian city maybe more deeply entrenched in pop culture than Rob Ford. There have been books and films and a play and jokes on late night on SNL, a musical, there's so much. And now there's this brand new documentary. Let me just play a little bit of it.
I do not use crack cocaine, nor am I an addict of crack cocaine.
Holy shit.
Holy shit.
Holy crap.
I just cannot believe what the mayor of Toronto just said on live television.
Terry, every time that this story returns, I gotta go like, wow, yeah, we lived through that. That's like a real thing that happened in the city. This new documentary, Trainwreck, Mayor Mayhem, does it live up to the title, do you think?
So, yeah, it's part of an anthology series about, I mean, stories that have gone terribly wrong. Everything from Woodstock 99 to like the poop cruise and the terrible tragedy, the Astroworld tragedy. And then we've got Rob Ford in there. So he's amongst some illustrious company. And I feel like the thing is we all feel we're amongst that company when it comes to the Rob Ford being the mayor of Toronto during this time. This is a UK production, UK producer and director. So it has this kind of outsider's perspective. You know, when you talk about going back and living through this time, I think we all can remember lots of things. There was one specific thing I forgot about the Jamaican patois video. That came back to me like, you know, a tidal wave. But, you know, going back to it and watching it told through somebody who didn't live in it, I think it does capture the mayhem of the time. There's lots of shots of Rob Ford like running away from the media. It doesn't look like Tom Cruise running away from the media. And, you know, I do think that the challenge that the doc has for those in Toronto, those in Ontario, and those in Canada, just marginally low.
Oh, I might have lost you there. Terry, a little bit? Okay, now you're back. You're back.
I'm back. Sorry. The challenge the doc has is showing us Canadians and Ontarians and Torontonians something new. But I do think it's a good kind of refresher of this crazy time and these reveals that were happening so quickly about Rob Ford and his addictions while he was the mayor of the biggest city in the country.
Well, boy, I mean, you talk about the idea of like the challenge of showing us something new. If I feel like I've watched this whole thing and go like, I lived through some of this. David, you truly lived this stuff because at the time you were the bureau chief of City Hall bureau chief of the Toronto Star. You are in this documentary. But also, I feel like if you lived through that time period and you covered Rob Ford through this time period, you must have like a certain version of events have kind of settled into your body, into your memory. And then you kind of watch this documentary, you're in it, and you watch all these people telling the story. When you watch it, do you feel like you're like seeing the events in a different way or kind of anew? Or how does it feel to sort of like see it through the Netflix documentary lens?
It actually, I mean, I learned things from it, which is great because if anybody should know almost everything about the Rob Ford story, it's me. But, you know, but because some of the characters were people in Rob Ford's orbit, people who were working for him. And some of it I knew, but some of it, Jerry, the security guard, who I knew as a presence there, who was usually trying to stop me from getting anywhere near the mayor to ask him questions. It was fascinating to see his response and his like emotional kind of memories of Rob Ford. So yeah, I thought in a 49-minute package, I thought they did a great job of conveying the sheer pace and madness of it. And I will admit, like I felt some exhaustion at the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, like a phantom limb coming back because it was an exhilarating and exhausting time as a journalist.
The thing that trained us, I think, the most for the Donald Trump as president years was sort of like living through this whole period of time of Rob Ford sort of news cycle, because like every day there was not one new thing. There were like 3 new things during, granted, a much more truncated kind of like timeline. But Teri, why do you think we're so captivated by Rob Ford then, but also now?
I think that he broke through this overwhelming perception of what we are as Canadians, which is that, you know, we are nice and we are definitely not scandalous and we are maybe even, you know, a little bit boring. There's a late night joke of like nothing happens in Toronto during this documentary. And you know, he was certainly not boring. He was certainly not nice at times, and he was definitely scandalous. So he broke through all of that. And I think, you know, it's hard to remember what the world was like before we had a politician who just outwardly lied and changed their mind, you know, seemingly overnight. But there was a time before that, and that time, to your point, Elamin, was Rob Ford. I mean, he had no shame, is the thing that I think was so incredible to watch. He would say, as you said, I did not smoke crack cocaine. I do not smoke crack cocaine. And then cut to, I did smoke crack cocaine. What do you want me to say about it? I'm sorry. Like, it was an incredible turn for him. And so, you know, we had whiplash watching him. And I think we were watching the world view Toronto and maybe Canada as a whole through a very different lens because of Rob Ford.
One of the key through lines of this documentary, David, is, and I think I forgot about this again because it's been enough time, but how adversarial Rob Ford was about the media. I mean, like, he would go on every day and say the Toronto Star is saying these things about me, they're just not true. And by the way, he's talking about you. And in this particular case, he's sort of casting you as some kind of, or casting the media, I should say, as some kind of political opposition. And this is years before you see Donald Trump say the term fake news, right? So like, what was it like trying to tell the Rob Ford story while also having Rob Ford use the microphone of the mayor's office to try to say the media, they're not telling the truth about me, and having people kind of maybe believe him too at the time?
Yeah, it was really difficult. I mean, it went from, I did very early stories on Rob Ford when there was rumors he was going to run, and we got along like really well. I spent a whole day with him as he did his constituency work, and, you know, admired him getting people potholes fixed and stuff like that. So when it became obvious that, you know, he had a real shot at being mayor, suddenly it turned. And I think his people and probably Rob himself, because I think the Fords have an incredible gut political instinct on how to turn situations to their own advantage, even situations that look like they could be disaster. And very early on, in a foreshadow of Donald Trump, said, we're going to discredit and delegitimize the media, and the Toronto Star are the ones who are the most likely to do us damage. So they started up this drumbeat, and they portrayed it as a war. And they said, well, they're out to get us. And I always said to people when they'd ask me about it, I said, it's not a war. Like, we're not trying to get Rob Ford out of office. We're covering him in exactly the same way we would have his 2 predecessors. And that was our yardstick for whether something was a story or not. But when you portray it as a war, suddenly he's able to just portray everything we do as being unfair and possibly false, when in fact he was lying all the time.
One of the interesting aspects that come out of this conversation that as you sort of like watch the documentary is Robin Doolittle reveals, Teri, that we don't pay for news in this country, right? Like, we don't, if you have the video, you know, like there's somebody was like, hey, I'm looking to sell this video of Rob Ford, he's smoking crack in it for $100,000. And one of the things that Robin Doolittle does in this is she says, well, we don't pay for news here in this country. And I guess I was reminded of that because it's maybe a thing that Canadians don't necessarily think about in terms of like the difference between our news culture and the news culture in the United States. And then I was also reminded that, like, the first time that you see something like that, it takes a website like Gawker, right, to sort of actually like show the video and actually like, okay, put that out there in the world. When you think about the differences in news cultures here versus in the United States, Teri, and how that story played out, how do you think the Rob Ford story changed how we talk about ourselves and like on our news, like our sense of like news stories?
Well, I think that it's a perfect representation of how influenced we are by American culture, and that we don't seem to see a difference between Canadian news and American news. I think many people are guilty of that. Meanwhile, there are significant differences
Yeah.
between the two. And I mean, I remember it was just, 2 weeks ago, and there was a major news story, and I flipped from watching CNN to watching CBC News Network. And the tone difference, the temperature of how people were speaking to each other was so fundamentally different. And I think it struck me as somebody who works in the media how different it was. And I think in some ways, Rob Ford, I mean, and we're saying it, if anybody's wondering, I mean, this documentary is certainly drawing that line, certainly a dotted one, sometimes a very, very bold line between the Rob Ford mayoral temperature and tone in Toronto, and the president of the United States in his second term, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really, really fascinating, will we ever get the answer? Did Donald Trump watch Rob Ford? Did Donald Trump take a playbook from the Ford family, as David quite rightly points out, and their gut political instincts? We'll never know, but it's certainly there, and you don't have to dig too deep to find it.
Not at all. And also in the doc, you see, there's a still of Rob Ford leaning against Donald Trump. There's also the moment of Rob Ford and Mike Tyson comes to visit City Hall. Rob Ford and Hulk Hogan, they have like a little, I want to talk about that actually, because this isn't like the first adaptation or deep dive into Rob Ford's time as mayor. There was Robin Doolittle's book, Crazy Town. There's a movie, Run This Town, where Rob Ford is played by Damian Lewis. There were jokes on SNL, and then also let's hear a late night joke on Rob Ford.
Now they're talking about a musical about the mayor of Toronto, Canada, Rob Ford. A musical about the mayor of Toronto, Canada, Rob Ford. And if you think that sounds like a good idea, I mean, you got to be on crack.
That's Letterman. That's Letterman making a Rob Ford joke. That musical, by the way, did happen. It was very poorly reviewed. How does this documentary, Teri, capture Rob Ford, the pop culture phenomenon, you think?
I think it does. I mean, as we just saw and heard, David Letterman and, all of the late night comedians were finding opportunities to make jokes about him and Toronto. But I think that what's interesting is there was something about Rob Ford's physicality. The fact that he really did look an awful lot like Chris Farley. He really did have this kind of overweight, kind of, he tried too hard at everything. He seemed like he wasn't maybe all that dangerous. And then, so that made him more ripe for jokes than pushback or criticism, I think, especially for people who weren't working with him and trying to run the city of Toronto. And maybe David, to your point, journalists trying to cover him in a responsible way and seeing comedians make light of the very real situation that was happening. And I think we did see that also, again, to draw that comparison, for certainly in Donald Trump's first presidency and to an extent also in his second presidency. So I think the pop culture impact is, are we looking at these political leaders who are doing real damage, and how much does the damage of poking fun at them versus being actual journalists, not that journalists poke fun at them, but actually looking at them critically, how much is that contributing to the problem? And I will just say, I think what was interesting too is when we got those videos of him smoking crack, I had a dear friend, Tracy, text me, and she was just like, crack is not a gateway drug. It's the end. And I think that was one of the things, what are we going to uncover here? And before anything else came out, he was very tragically diagnosed with cancer, died very quickly and very young. He wasn't even 47 years old when he died. So that contributes as well.
Yeah, David, I think that the documentary is quite explicitly, I think, inviting you to make the parallels between the way that Rob Ford conducted himself during this period of time and some of the adversarial relationships that, Donald Trump has had with the media and with sort of trying to assert his own framing. When you think about Rob Ford's time in office, what do you think, so many years later, what do you think Rob Ford's legacy is?
I think, to pick up on something Teri said earlier, it is, I think he was like a first sign that a populist politician who had all kinds of baggage, who normally in normal world politics of past decades wouldn't even be considered for office, can get elected. And part of it is that if they can lie with impunity, if they have no political shame, and if the public is willing to let them get away with it, and in some cases even cheer it on, then that's an incredibly powerful political weapon. But it's dangerous for society because I think Rob Ford was the start of kind of the fact-free universe as far as current affairs and how we view each other and public policy, where the vibes about a politician is considered just as valid, or maybe more so than what they've actually done.
Yeah.
So I think he was an early, I don't know, a warning signal, although there are people who are flooding social media now saying he was the best mayor ever, and this documentary proves it.
Oh.
So it all depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
But he was definitely the start of that.
Yeah, there's a moment in the documentary where his chief of staff says, I said, Rob, there must be about 2,000 people here tonight, and then Rob gets on stage and says, there's 5,000 people here tonight, and like that perfectly sort of illustrates that idea of the fact-free universe. I got to leave it there. I really appreciate your time and your reflections, you guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Teri Hart is a culture and entertainment reporter in Toronto, and David Ryder is a senior political reporter for the Toronto Star. You can watch that documentary, by the way, Trainwreck, Mayor Mayhem, right now on Netflix. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, I don't have to tell you that in this moment right now, this world needs a little bit more empathy. And there is a TV show that is trying to get us there, and it's called Empathie. It's set in a maximum security psychiatric institution in Montreal. It follows Suzanne. She's a psychiatrist who specializes in treating patients who have committed horrific crimes. Suzanne herself is a survivor of trauma, and which is kind of like a really big part of why she can really easily connect with some of the patients that she's working with. Empathie is the most watched French language Canadian show on Crave right now. Thomas Leblanc is here to tell us about why you should also be watching it. Thomas, hello. Nice to see you.
Good morning, bonjour.
Hey, nice to have you here. Listen, I briefly kind of described the premise of the show, but I want people to take a listen to this. It's Suzanne's first day on the job, and she's accompanied by Mortimer in this high security unit.
Ça va faire du bien une nouvelle psychiatre.
Ah ouais, pourquoi?
Parce que l'LD, c'est un peu l'unité fourre-tout. Le personnel change tout le temps, c'est des cas psychiatriques souvent désespérés, des patients qui ont peu de chance d'être réhabilités.
C'est parfait, ça me ressemble. Moi aussi, je suis un cas désespéré.
D'habitude, les psys disent pas des trucs comme ça.
Oh non?
Bah non.
So that's a moment that perfectly sets up, I think, the premise of the show. That's Mortimer saying, hey, this unit is full of hopeless cases. And then Suzanne, first day on the job, is like, that's perfect because she's a hopeless case too. How do you think that sets up the trajectory that we enter with Empathie?
I think it sets up the tone of the show. There's a dark humor that Suzanne has about, the way she sees herself and she sees people around her. If we get a bit factual, it's also like a workplace drama. A lot of things happen, in the institution itself. And then we go into the backstory of different characters. There's also the friendship of Suzanne and Mortimer. Mortimer is an immigrant from France who moved to Montreal with his mother, African background, and he works at the ward, and he has to stay with Suzanne when she's with patients, so that it very quickly kind of shapes their relationship.
Yeah.
Eventually, he drives her to work. We kind of dive into that, early friendship. When you have a new colleague and you're like, oh, we could actually be friends. And then in the institution, we learn more about like all the people working there, and also about the people who are staying there, the patients. We go into their story.
Well, I was going to say, Thomas, like Kelly Nussdorf for the Globe and Mail said that this show is one of the most, the quote was, most fiercely original, operatically emotional show on Canadian TV right now. That's what he said. What do you think makes the show so original?
I think because we really understand the arc of every character. Sometimes on shows you don't understand the motivation of every character, but they need to accomplish something. But we have time with this show. We have 10. Every episode is, I think, 45 minutes. There are 10 of them, so we really have time to dive into every character and understand what's their motivation, what's making them tick. So I think that's the first thing. I think the tone, very easily, a show like this could be too melodramatic, and there are moments that are quite melodramatic. But as I said, the humor is what I preferred about this show, the comedy, the dark comedy. And Florence Lompré, the star of the show, the writer of the show, the creator of the show, is insanely funny. She got her start on television playing a makeup artist, like a really funny makeup artist. And then, that was like 9 years ago, and now she's the star of her own show, which is and she's also written, maybe people have seen this show, Can You Hear Me, on Netflix, which was co-written with another writer here from Quebec. And it's the same sort of like kind of, you show people that you don't usually see on television, which, in this case, people who are like the patients.
Yeah.
But then you really humanize them. And I think that's what is so different and special about the show.
I think I'm glad that you brought up Florence, because like her performance in this is just completely unbelievable. Like I think like it sort of pivots in these scenes where she goes. I mean, it's a dramedy, and the dramatic notes are so deeply dramatic, but she's also so funny in this show, and you actually like don't know what to do with yourself as you're watching this. But also her character, Suzanne, the main character. Why do you think she's someone who empathizes with others so well? Like what do you think it is about that character that has kind of gives a door to other characters?
We got to talk about her backstory. So Suzanne is in her late 30s. She's a psychiatrist. She recently lost her fiance. We heard that early. We learned that early on. Who was pregnant? She was in a same-sex partnership, and then she lost her fiance or her wife, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
We learned through flashbacks that Suzanne was found in a garbage bin by her mother, who is a really successful Black lawyer. So she grew up in a Black family. So you have to really suspend this belief and be like, okay, this white psychiatrist grows up in this really wealthy, really bourgeois environment where her mother is like a really successful Black lawyer and her father is a novelist.
And she's found as an abandoned baby in a dumpster. Like that's where that's
exactly.
her life beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, and we refer really, really often to that. So she really is able, because we know this, to kind of connect with like the early story and like the beginning, the origin story of every person that's around her. In the institution, obviously the patients. There's one character specifically, Monsieur Dallaire, who he has a hard time connecting to reality. They try to make him have a relationship, like a friendship, with like a different character in the wing, Mr. Koskov.
Yeah.
And then eventually that develops. But then we go into the backstory of Monsieur Dallaire and his sister, who might not be his sister. We learn he's adopted. He had a relationship with her. So we kind of go into that. And then, but because we have time, we really understand the motivation. And then Suzanne, because of her own story, she relates to in this case Mr. Dallaire, but like to different characters because of part of their story. And I think that's what's so good, is like we see how we relate to other people's story through part of our own stories through the character of Suzanne.
Just with the time that we have left, I want to sort of talk about the thing that this show pulls off kind of miraculously here. But we have about a minute left for this. But
yes,
it's just to talk about the idea of like when the show asks you to have empathy for people who've committed murder against innocent people, and you say that's going to be a big ask for the show to land. How do you think the show actually manages to do that?
I think that it's the way Suzanne speaks to these people, the way she speaks to criminals who have mental illness and mental issues, and she sees them as human beings. She challenges them. She speaks to them as adults, and it's the communication style and the acting and really it's the performance. This show you have to see for the performance of all the actors, but specifically Florence. I think that's what works so well, and it's so. And I mean, listen, the show is getting rave reviews. It's been shown at Série Mania in Cannes, which is really prestigious, and it's all deserved. And it's, I think, all because of the writing and Florence Lompré's performance, and the cast around her is really quite wonderful. And the way she speaks to patients, you have to watch it. So just to see how she flips between her own life and then that communication style.
Thomas, I have 30 seconds before we got to end the show, but with that time, I'm watching the show but reading subtitles because I don't speak French. What am I missing? Like, what's the thing that I don't actually end up catching in terms of nuances?
I would say the cultural relationship between Québécois francophones and the French character Émilien, who's from France, he's not a psychiatrist, but he works with Suzanne, and they have a lot of tension.
Yeah.
And I think it's a thing that's really common in Quebec because we have a lot of people from France, and sometimes there's cultural differences. I think it's really lovely to see that on the screen because it's not something we see often on Quebec television.
Right.
And eventually their relationship gets better.
That's a beautiful place to leave it. Tomas, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, friend.
Thank you, Elamin.
Yes,
Thank
of
you.
course. Tomas Leblanc is a culture commentator at Radio-Canada. Empathie has been renewed for a second season. You got to watch the first season. It's on Crave. My name is Elamin. This is Commotion. We'll see you tomorrow.